Hi everyone, welcome to Story Time for West Valley Family Resource Center. I'm Joella and I'm going to tell you a story today. It's called Little Possum and the Thing in the Creek. Now each week I'm hoping to tell you a story, and afterwards there will be a place where you can click on the West Valley Family Resource Center Facebook webpage, and you'll be able to find activities that you can do related to the story. There'll be art activities, science activities, movement and cooking activities, things you can do that will help you with understanding the story. Now the story I'm going to tell, and every story each week will be one that I tell and not read, so you're going to have to use your imagination and draw pictures in your mind to think about what's happening. This story is called Little Possum and the Thing in the Creek. Now a possum is a little animal that looks just like this. He has a little nose and long whiskers, little tiny eyes, little tiny ears, and a long skinny tail. And a creek is water that looks like this. That's another name for a stream or a river. And this is how the story goes. Once upon a time, there was a little possum, and he lived with his mom. One day, his mother said to him, "Little possum, I want you to go through the woods, over to the creek, and across the bridge, because on the other side there are blackberries, and they are ripe and fat and just ready for picking." And Little Possum said, "Okay, I'll pick some blackberries, and we can have them for our supper." So off Little Possum went. Little Possum walked, Little Possum ran, and Little Possum skipped, until he met Mr. Owl. And Mr. Owl said, Who goes there?" And Little Possum said, "It's me, Little Possum. I'm going through the woods, over to the creek, and across the bridge, because on the other side there are blackberries ready for picking." And Mr. Owl said, "Hoo, be careful, Little Possum. There's a thing in the creek." And Little Possum thought, "Oh my." But Little Possum said, "It's okay. My mom said it's okay. I'm going to do this." So Little Possum walked, Little Possum ran, and Little Possum skipped, until he met Mr. Rabbit. And Mr. Rabbit said, Little Possum, where are you going, Little Possum? Where are you going, Little Possum?" And Little Possum said, "I'm going through the woods, over to the creek, and across the bridge to pick blackberries for my supper." And Mr. Rabbit said, "Ooh, be careful, Little Possum, be careful, Little Possum. There's a thing in the creek, there's a thing in the creek." "Oh my goodness," said Little Possum. "Now my two friends said there's a thing in the creek, Mr. Owl and Mr. Rabbit. But my mom said that I should do this, so I'm going to." Little Possum walked, Little Possum ran, and Little Possum skipped, until he got to Mr. Wolf. And Mr. Wolf said, Little Possum, where are you going, Little Possum?" And Little Possum said, "I'm going through the woods, over to the creek, and across the bridge to pick blackberries for my supper." And Mr. Wolf said, "Ooh, be careful, Little Possum, be careful. There's a thing in the creek." And Little Possum thought, "Oh my gosh, now I am a little bit worried. 3 friends said there's a thing in the creek. Mr. Wolf, Mr. Rabbit, and Mr. Owl all said there's a thing in the creek. Okay, but I'm gonna go." Little Possum walked, Little Possum ran, and Little Possum skipped, until he finally made it to the creek. And there was the creek, bubbling along. And there was the bridge. And on the other side of the bridge there were blackberries, and they were big and ripe and juicy and just ready for picking. And Little Possum said, "Oh, it's time for me to go." And he started across the bridge. When he got to the middle of the bridge, he thought, "I'm just going to take a little peek." And he leaned over like this to look down into the creek, and he said, "Ah!" And he ran He ran so fast, he ran all the way back to Mr. Wolf, and he said, Mr. Wolf, oh my gosh, you're right, there is a thing in the creek. Oh, that thing in the creek had a little nose. That thing in the creek had little eyes. It had long whiskers, little ears, and a long skinny tail. Oh, you're right, Mr. Wolf, there is a thing in the creek. And Mr. Wolf said, you know what I would do if I saw that thing in the creek? I would get a great big rock and throw it at the thing in the creek. And Little Possum said, oh, that's a really good idea. I think I'll do that. So Little Possum picked up a great big rock and he started back over to the creek. Little Possum walked, Little Possum ran, and Little Possum skipped, and he got back to the creek. There was the bridge. There were those blackberries. He had that great big rock in his hand, and he started across the bridge. When he got to the middle, he thought, I'm just going to take a peek and see if it's still there. And he leaned over like this, and he looked, and he went, ah! And he ran. He ran so fast, he ran all the way back to Mr. Rabbit. He said, oh, Mr. Rabbit, you are right. There is a thing in the creek. That thing in the creek has a little nose. That thing in the creek has long whiskers. It has little eyes, little ears. It has a long, skinny tail. And when I had a great big rock, it had a great big rock too. And Mr. Rabbit said, oh, Little Possum, I have an idea. If I saw that thing in the creek, I would take a great big stick and give it a whack. And Little Possum said, that's a really good idea. That's a really good idea. So he got a great big stick and he carried it with him back over to the creek. Little Possum walked, Little Possum ran, and Little Possum skipped until he got back over to the creek. And there was the bridge, and there were the blackberries, and he started across the bridge. When he got to the middle of the bridge, holding that great big stick, he said, I'm just going to peek, and he leaned over like this, and he went, ah! And he ran. He ran so fast, he ran all the way back to Mr. Owl. And he said, oh, Mr. Owl, you won't believe it. There is a thing in the creek. That thing in the creek has a little tiny nose just like me, and little tiny eyes just like me, long skinny whiskers just like me, and it has little tiny ears, I think I said already, and a long skinny tail. And when I had a great big rock, it had a great big rock. When I had a great big stick, it had a great big stick. Oh, Mr. Owl, what am I going to do? And Mr. Owl said, ooh, you know what I'd do if I saw a thing in the creek? I'd stick my fingers in my ears like this, and I'd stick my tongue out like this, and I would go, Little Possum said, that's a really good idea. That's what I'm going to do. So Little Possum walked, and Little Possum ran, and Little Possum skipped until he got back over to the creek. And there was the bridge, and there were those blackberries ripe and ready for picking. And Little Possum walked across the bridge. When he got to the middle, he thought, I'm just going to take a peek. He put his fingers in his ears just in case, and he leaned over like this with his tongue out. And he went, ah! And he ran. He ran so fast, he ran all the way home to his mom. He said, Mom, I cannot get you any blackberries. There is a thing in the creek. That thing in the creek has a little tiny nose. It has little tiny eyes. It has long whiskers, little tiny ears, and a long skinny tail. And when I had a big rock, it had a big rock. And when I had a big stick, it had a big stick. And when I went, it went too. And his mom said, Little Possum, you are going to get us some blackberries, and this is what you're going to do. If you see that thing in the creek, you're going to give that thing in the creek a great big possum grin. Now a grin is a great big smile from ear to ear, just like that. Little Possum thought, I don't know. But he said, my mom is usually right, so I'm going to try it. So little Possum walked, and little Possum ran, and little Possum skipped until he made it all the way back over to the bridge. When he got there, he started across. He leaned over just to take a peek with his grin on his face, and he looked. And you know what? The thing in the creek grinned right back at him. So he thought, I'm going to try it again. He leaned over like this. Yeah, the thing in the creek grinned right back. Little Possum thought, it's okay. He walked the rest of the way across the bridge. He filled his basket full of blackberries, dark and juicy and fat and ready for eating. When his basket was full of blackberries, he started back across the bridge. And he thought, I'm just going to look again, see if that thing in the creek is still there. And he leaned over like this. And it did. It grinned right back at him. And he leaned over again and he waved. And the thing in the creek waved right back. Little Possum walked. Little Possum ran. And little Possum skipped until he was all the way back home. When he made it home, he said, Mom, we've got blackberries. Everything's okay. And they had a lovely supper of blackberries and sugar, and it was delicious. And that's the end of that story. Well, what do you think little Possum was seeing in the creek? Was it really a monster, or was it something else? Some of you might have figured out that what he was really seeing was his reflection. Reflection is what you see when you look into a mirror, or sometimes when you look into water that's kind of dark and still, you'll see your reflection in there too. So you might see your reflection if you looked into a mirror like this. You would see your reflection, or you might see it some other ways too. The activities that I have planned for you this week, some of them, I'll show you a couple of examples, so you might want to click on the example. You might be able to make a little possum made out of a toilet paper tube. And since possums sometimes like to use that long skinny tail to hang on a branch of a tree, I put a pipe cleaner on there, but you might have a different idea of what you can use if you don't have a pipe cleaner in your house. I also, if you can, you can make a mirror. This one's made with an old thing called a CD. Some of your grown-ups probably will know what that is. Kids don't usually know what that is anymore. And I used a popsicle stick to hold it on. There's also some science activities in there that I didn't get out because they're kind of messy, that have to do with water and mirrors and making rainbows. And there's also some activities with dancing and using a mirror. There's lots of interesting things to do there. So go ahead and click on the activities to see if you would like to do some of those, and let me know what you thought of the story. Let me know what you thought of the activity so I'll know what I need to do for next time. And until next time, have a good week. See you later. Bye-bye.